The following time period has been made available to District Attorney Jim Garrison of New Orleans to reply to an NBC News program broadcast on June 19th. In that program, NBC News examined some of the methods used by Mr. Garrison in his investigation of what he charges was a conspiracy to assassinate President Kennedy. Except for the opening and closing announcements, this program has been prepared under Mr. Garrison's sole supervision. Mr. Garrison.
Tonight I'm going to talk to you about truth and about fairy tales, about justice and about injustice. In the months to follow, you're going to learn that many of the things which some of the major news agencies have been telling you are untrue. You're going to learn that although you are citizens of the United States, information concerning the cause of the death of your president has been withheld from you. In the months to come, you will learn to your own satisfaction that President Kennedy was not killed by a lone assassin. You will learn that there has been and continues to be a concerted effort to keep you from learning these facts. And you will learn, I assure you, that what I have been trying to tell you and what I'm telling you tonight is true. As children, we become accustomed to hearing fairy tales. They're always pleasant stories, and they're comforting to hear because good always triumphs over evil. At least, this is the way it is in fairy tales. Fairy tales are not dangerous for our children, and are probably even good for them up to a point. However, in the real world, in which you and I must live, fairy tales are dangerous. They're dangerous because they're untrue. Anything which is untrue is dangerous. And it is all the more dangerous when a fairy tale becomes accepted as reality simply because it has an official seal of approval, or because honorable men announce that you must believe it, or because powerful elements of the press tell you that the fairy tale is true. The conclusion of the Warren report that President Kennedy was killed by a lone assassin is a fairy tale. This does not mean that the men on the Warren Commission were aware at the time that their conclusion was totally untrue, nor does it mean necessarily that these men had any sinister motives. It does mean that the conclusion that no conspiracy existed and that Lee Oswald was a lone assassin is a fiction and a myth, and that it should be brought to an end. The people of this country don't have to be protected from the truth. This country was not built on the idea that a handful of nobles, whether located in our federal agencies in Washington, D.C., or in the news agencies in New York, should decide what was good for the people to know and what they should not know. This is a totalitarian concept which presumes that the leaders of our federal government and the men in control of the powerful press media constitute a special elite which, by virtue of their nobility and their brilliance, empower them to think for the people. Personally, I would rather put my confidence in the common sense of the people of this country. The truth about the assassination of the president has been concealed from you long enough. Those forces which are fighting so hard today to tell you that they have examined the Warren report and that everything is fine and that our investigation has uncovered nothing, are not merely going to lose this fight. They have already lost it. Now let me tell you why President Kennedy was murdered and how he was murdered. I also want to give you a few examples which will show you how the conclusion reached by the Warren Commission is totally impossible. President Kennedy was assassinated by men who sought to obtain a radical change in our foreign policy, particularly with regard to Cuba. You recall that under President Kennedy, the Cold War began to thaw, and there were new signs of an effort on the part of the Soviet Union and ourselves to understand each other. On the map, this appears to be merely a large island off the coast of Florida. But for many men, it meant a good deal more than this. In 1963, a great variety of interests existed which not only desired an American-supported invasion of Castro's Cuba, but took it for granted that it was inevitable. In the minds of many men, this island represented a tremendous emotional landmark because they had steered their courses toward it for so long and with such intensity. In the fall of 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred. It was followed by a pronounced new attitude towards Cuba on the part of the United States. Cuba, after this, was no longer regarded as an enemy and was no longer regarded as fair game for those men who, for one reason or another, focused their attention on this island. the new signs of understanding between Russia and the United States continue to develop. In June of 1963, President Kennedy, addressing students at the American University in Washington, told them, "We breathe the same air as the Russians." He said we should try to live together in peace on this earth. Well, at this point, some individuals transfer their hostile attention from Fidel Castro to John F. Kennedy.
I think we have great opportunities together as two countries that, frankly, we have not been getting along very well for the last number of years. I've been here not too long, but it's getting close to 2 years. But I think we will end up having an extraordinary relationship. I hope so. I've been saying, and I'm sure you've heard over the years, and as I campaigned, that getting along with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Great if we actually got along with Russia. Am I wrong in saying that? Wouldn't it be great? Okay? You know, Russia, like us, has nuclear weapons, folks. It would be really nice if we got along with Russia and others that we don't get along with right now. I think that we do have good relations with Russia. I say it loud and clear. I've been saying it for years. I think it's a good thing if we have great relationships, or at least good relationships with Russia. That's very important, and I believe someday that will happen. It's a big country. It's a nuclear country. It's a country that we should get along with, and I think we will eventually get along with Russia. Nobody has been tougher on Russia, but getting along with Russia would be a good thing, not a bad thing. And just about everybody agrees to that, except very stupid people.
If you, the people of the United States, will learn the truth that the president was assassinated by men who were once connected with a Central Intelligence Agency, of course, this might reflect on the dignity of the CIA. But I happen to believe that our form of government is strong enough to survive the truth. I believe that you are entitled to the truth about how your president was shot down in the street and how it was done. Instead, some of the most powerful news agencies we have in our country have worked hard to convince you that everything is all right.
A few months ago, when you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not Al-Qaeda, you said Russia. In the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back because, the Cold War has been over for 20 years.
Ooh, sick burn, Mr. President. Joe Biden piled on, of course, saying, quote, Romney acts like he thinks the Cold War is still on. I don't know where he's been. Well, fast forward 10 years, and Russia has now invaded, over those 10 years, a Democratic U.S. ally for the second time, once under Obama, now once under Biden.
Every reporter in that room asked a follow-up, why won't you answer Peter's question? We would get answers.
Right. Well, that's the difference between your experience and obviously the experience now. Every single person in that room was in lockstep against you as a member of the Trump administration. Now, it's the exact opposite. Every single member in that room, by and large, when it comes to the Hunter Biden story, the third rail of American politics, avoids Hunter Biden like the plague. They know they cannot ask any questions for some reason that I'd probably find out at some point. You know how we're going to find out? When we follow the money.
But we know the reason, because they all want a credential to be in that room.
But Peter Ducey has a credential. He has the question. It goes beyond that. This is part of the cover-up that we saw in October.
As Haley McEnany pointed out, why was there only one other reporter in the press pack that followed up on Peter's question?
How is that silence consistent with the president's promise to always level with the American public? Because, in public he says he hasn't discussed these business dealings. And then, at least according to the voicemail that's been obtained by the Daily Mail and the Washington Examiner, it certainly seems like he was seeking to do exactly that, have a conversation about these business dealings. Is he leveling with the American public on this?
The concept of the media avoiding questioning the White House on Hunter Biden's scandals is nothing new. When the New York Post first reported the contents inside Hunter's discarded laptop in October 2020, mainstream media dismissed it as Russian disinformation. The contents of the laptop unveiled numerous personal scandals for Hunter, including a tangled web of overseas financial deals he was involved in. But the thing is, Joe Biden has long maintained he has zero knowledge of his son's overseas business deals, claiming he's never questioned him on it and that Hunter has never made money from China. However, this leaked voicemail Joe Biden sent Hunter in 2018 contradicts that, as he tells his son he thinks he's in the clear in relation to a New York Times article that links him to a dodgy Chinese oil tycoon.
Hey, pals, Dad, it's 8:15 on Wednesday night. If you get a chance, give me a call. Nothing urgent. Just want to talk to you. I thought the article, at least if it's not online, it's going to be printed tomorrow in the Times, was good. I think it's clear. And anyway, if you get a chance, give me a call. I love you.
Under Biden's scandalous business deals continue again to be shielded from the public. In a letter, James Comer wrote to Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen in May. It references a CBS report that showed over 150 financial transactions from Hunter had been flagged as concerning by US banks.
What does it tell you about the Biden family business that not one, not two, not six suspicious activity flags were caught by Treasury, but over 150, Congressman?
Well, I came from a banking background. My family's involved in banking, and I can tell you this. It's very uncommon for anyone in America to get more than one suspicious activity report. 99.9% of Americans never get a suspicious activity report.
They do not tell you that Lee Harvey Oswald's fingerprints were not found on the gun, which was supposed to have killed the president. And they do not tell you that nitrate tests exonerated Lee Oswald from the actual shooting by showing that he had not fired a rifle that day. And they do not tell you that it was virtually impossible for Oswald to have taken his fingerprints off the gun, hidden the gun, and gone down 4 flights of stairs.
The Warren Commission was aware of something else that was wrong with their evidence.
All kinds of ballistic tests show that the bullets, in fact, came from that rifle. That was his rifle. You took a picture of him with it. His palm prints and fingerprints were all over the school book depository.
You have been misinformed. The ballistic test did not prove anything at all.
This is the weapon that was used. A rather well-worn military rifle.
We know that Oswald had possession of that rifle because we have him photographed with it, and we have his wife saying that it was, quote, faithful rifle of Lee Oswald.
Is the rifle in evidence today the same rifle the commission said Oswald ordered through the mail?
The rifle that Lee Oswald allegedly ordered under an alias of Alex Heidel was obtained through Klein's Sporting Goods store in Chicago as a mail order. Got it out of American Rifleman magazine. He wrote on the coupon he wanted a 36-inch model Mannlicher Carcano 6.5 millimeter for $19.95. Robert Frazier was one of the examiners. He was a firearms expert for the FBI, and he testified that he did measure it, and the measurement was 40.2 inches in length from barrel to stock. There's a 4.2-inch difference in the one he ordered versus what they found in the book depository.
Klein's may have indeed delivered a different Mannlicher Carcano model to Oswald, but there are other anomalies to this story. The model that Oswald ordered showed these strap attachment points on the bottom of the barrel and stock.
In the photograph is Lieutenant Carl Day with the Dallas Police Department bringing a rifle out of the book depository. One of the straps at the back of the gun is on the left side of the stock, embedded in the stock. That's clearly not the rifle that was ordered, or at least appears in the Klein's Sporting Goods store.
The straps shown in the so-called backyard photos are on the bottom and not on the side of the stock.
Marina Oswald took backyard photographs of Lee Oswald holding a rifle and a pistol on his hip. And in that first photograph that she took 3 of, Commission Exhibit 133A and 133B show a ring on the ring finger of the right hand. 133C, the ring appears on the left hand. In fact, the Dallas police showed Lee Oswald one of the pictures while he was still in custody. He said, "That's my face, but I don't remember ever having that picture taken of me."
But after all these questions are asked, the underlying mystery remains. Why would anyone use a rifle in an assassination knowing there was a paper trail that would lead right back to them?
Was there a palm print found on the rifle?
The foremost fingerprint expert the FBI had, Sebastian Latona, took that rifle and attempted to lift prints off of the rifle, the stock and or the barrel. He testified to the Warren Commission that he found no usable prints anywhere on that rifle, on the metal or the stock. But yet Lieutenant Day in Dallas, before the rifle went to Washington, said he found a partial palm print on the trigger guard on the left side and a partial print underneath the stock on the barrel. But Sebastian Latona said there was no evidence of a lift that even been attempted.
No partials at all?
Nothing that he could use in court. There has to be 8 points of identification. He found nothing that would match that.
Overwhelming eyewitness testimony that shots were coming from behind the stone wall on the grassy knoll. In a choice between official dignity and the truth, dignity was given priority, and so you have not received the full truth. This is why there continue to be hundreds of documents still hidden from your eyes and classified as secret.
Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton cannot seem to extinguish a growing firestorm over her emails. And tonight it seems to be getting worse. There are new allegations that she didn't just delete tens of thousands of those emails from her personal account. She wiped the server clean. Here's ABC's David Wright.
Did Hillary Clinton try to hide vital correspondence on Benghazi and other matters of state? We may never know. The chair of the committee investigating Benghazi now says Secretary Clinton unilaterally decided to wipe her server clean and permanently delete all emails from her personal server. Clinton claimed from the outset she had nothing to hide, that she had turned over all relevant work emails and urged them to be made public.
I chose not to keep my private personal emails.
So the committee requested she hand over the server to a third party. This is from Fox News.
I just can't trust her lawyers to make the determination that the public's getting everything they're entitled to.
Now Clinton's lawyers say she's ready and willing to come and appear herself for a hearing open to the American public.
Madam Secretary, to Ms. Sanchez, about what you heard that night, what you're doing, but nowhere in there did you mention a video. You didn't mention a video because there was never a video-inspired protest in Benghazi. There was in Cairo, but not in Benghazi. Victoria Nuland, your spokesperson at the State Department, hours after the attack said this: Benghazi has been attacked by militants. In Cairo, police have removed demonstrators. Benghazi, you got weapons and explosions. Cairo, you got spray paint and rocks. 1 hour before the attack in Benghazi, Chris Stevens walks the diplomat to the front gate. The ambassador didn't report a demonstration. He didn't report it because it never happened. An eyewitness in the command center that night on the ground said no protest, no demonstration. 2 intelligence reports that day. No protest, no demonstration. The attack starts at 3:42 Eastern Time, ends at approximately 11:40 p.m. that night. At 4:06, an ops alert goes out across the State Department. It says this: mission under attack, armed men, shots fired, explosions heard. No mention of a video, no mention of a protest, no mention of a demonstration. But the best evidence is Greg Hicks, the #2 guy in Libya, the guy who worked side by side with Ambassador Stevens. He was asked if there had been a protest, would the ambassador have reported it? Mr. Hicks' response? Absolutely. For there to have been a demonstration on Chris Stevens' front door and him not to have reported it is unbelievable, Mr. Hicks said. He said, secondly, if it had been reported, he would have been out the back door within minutes, and there was a back gate. Everything points to a terrorist attack. There was not conflicting information the day of the attack because your press secretary said, if pressed, there's no connection between Cairo and Benghazi. It was clear. You're the ones who muddied it up, not the information.
Well, there's no connection.
Here's what I think's going on. Here's what I think's going on. Let me show you one more slide. Again, this is from Victoria Nuland, your press person. She says to Jake Sullivan and Philippe Reines, subject line reads this: Romney's statement on Libya. Email says, this is what Ben was talking about. I assume Ben is the now somewhat famous Ben Rhodes, author of the Talking Points memo. This email's at 10:35, 27 minutes after your 10:08 statement. 27 minutes after you've told everyone it's a video. While Americans are still fighting because the attack's still going on, your top people are talking politics. Seems to me that night you had 3 options, Secretary. You could tell the truth, like you did with your family, like you did with the Libyan president, like you did with the Egyptian prime minister. Tell them it was a terrorist attack. You could say, you know what, we're not quite sure. Don't really know for sure. I don't think the evidence is there. I think it's all in the first one, but you could have done that. But you picked a third option. You picked the video narrative. You picked the one with no evidence, and you did it because Libya was supposed to be, as Mr. Roskin pointed out, this great success story for the Obama White House and the Clinton State Department. And a key campaign theme that year was GM's alive, bin Laden's dead, Al-Qaeda's on the run. And now you have a terrorist attack. And it's a terrorist attack in Libya. And it's just 56 days before an election. If there's no evidence for a video-inspired protest, then where'd the false narrative start? Started with you, Madam Secretary.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
No, I'm sure it did.
The Central Intelligence Agency's dossier on Lee Harvey Oswald and the CIA file on Jack Ruby. You have not been told that Lee Oswald was in the employ of the United States intelligence agencies. But this was the case And so I am telling you.
Breaking news, CNN learning tonight that Hillary Clinton's campaign and the Democratic National Committee helped fund the research which led to the controversial and, frankly, salacious and disgusting in some of its allegations dossier that detailed alleged Russian efforts to help Donald Trump's presidential campaign. The Washington Post was first to report this. Out front, one of the reporters who just broke the story, Adam Entis with the Washington Post. Adam, good to have you back. So let's just start with the bottom line here. Clinton, the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. What exactly did they do?
Well, I mean, they have a lawyer, and that lawyer went about looking to hire research firms. One of the firms that they hired was this company in Washington here called Fusion GPS. Fusion GPS, in turn, subcontracted out to Christopher Steele, the former British intelligence officer, to help get information about Trump's relationships in Russia. Those reports that Chris Steele produced were then passed back to the lawyer who was representing the Clinton campaign.
Now, when you say the money, do you have any idea how much money it was?
No, the people we talked to wouldn't tell us. They told us that the amount of money paid to Fusion GPS was shared between the campaign and the DNC. But we don't know what the dollar figures are, and we don't know exactly how that was broken down between the two organizations.
So, Adam, I want to, the point that you're making here, right? I mean, and whatever word you want to use for this, whether it was intelligence or opposition research, right? Whoever's paying for it, Christopher Steele, this former British intelligence agent, went out and got this information.
You have said that you believe that the dossier that was presented by the intel community to Mr. Trump, as well as to President Obama, it included the opposition research with wild, unconfirmed accusations about Mr. Trump. You've called that, quote, a garbage document. What did you mean by that?
I mean that, first of all, the meeting that the intelligence chiefs had with Trump was to go over their very good assessment of Russian hacking, and then they added, as CNN first reported in a terrific story, because this is news, this two-page summary of this dossier that's full of all these unconfirmed allegations. I've read those 35 pages. The quality is not good. It is the sort of document that you would, they tainted the good report they had on Russian hacking by including this, and they shouldn't have done that.
The intel community.
They should have found a channel to make sure Trump got it, maybe through the White House counsel.
During 12 hours of questioning, to give you another example, 12 hours of questioning after the assassination, there is no transcript of Oswald's statements available for you to look at. Now, it doesn't matter where you live. If somebody in your town steals a 1928 automobile, what he says is written down when he's questioned. However, when a man who has just killed the President of the United States is questioned for 12 hours, no transcript is available. There's nothing for you to look at. And believe it or not, one of the explanations given is that the room was too small to include a stenographer.
It's the single greatest witch hunt in American history, probably in history, but in American history.
Trump responding to critics who want him impeached because of his conversation with Zelensky. Democrats charged that the president threatened the Ukrainian with a cutoff in aid if Ukraine didn't investigate former Vice President Joe Biden for corruption. Now an official impeachment inquiry is underway in the House.
It is shocking at another level that the White House would release these notes and felt that somehow this would help the president's case or cause, because what those notes reflect is a classic mafia-like shakedown of a foreign leader.
The transcript does show Trump sought a review of Joe Biden's family dealings in Ukraine, but he didn't directly link starting a Biden investigation with granting U.S. military aid to Ukraine. At one point in the call, the president said, "A lot of European countries are the same way, so I think it's something you want to look at, but the United States has been very, very good to Ukraine. I wouldn't say that it's reciprocal necessarily because things are happening that are not good, but the United States has been very, very good to Ukraine." This afternoon, Trump and Zelensky appeared together at the United Nations, with the Ukrainian backing up the president and Trump defending himself.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be involved to democratic, open elections of USA. No, you heard that we had, I think, good phone call It was normal. We spoke about many things, and so I think, and you read it, that nobody pushed it.
The headline is that we have heard directly now from two very senior and important National Security Council officials about their significant concerns about the Trump administration's dealings with Ukraine, and they describe in fairly vivid detail the anxiety that they were feeling as these conversations were taking place, and they describe the anxiety about other officials, including the National Security Advisor at the time, John Bolton. There is a sense and a description from these two witnesses about this desire to move Ukraine policy out of the normal foreign policy channels and have that responsibility delegated to Rudy Giuliani. And that's something that Bolton gets concerned about. And in fact, there is discussion from one of the witnesses about Bolton saying none of us should be talking to Rudy Giuliani. That's a bad thing. She describes this really key moment in which she says John Bolton's neck stiffened when Gordon Sondland, who was the ambassador to the European Union, describes hearing Mick Mulvaney say, we have a deal, there's this deal where there's going to be an announcement about an investigation into an energy company in Ukraine. And of course, that energy company is the company that's linked to Hunter Biden.
And here's something else. This case has more accidental fires, more burning of paper than any murder case in history. For example, when Oswald was questioned by a federal agent in August of 1963, the notes of the interview were later burned. You cannot see the notes made by Commander Hume concerning the president's autopsy because he burned them too. One of the questioners of Lee Harvey Oswald during the 12-hour session burned his notes. And similarly, when the Warren Commission contacted the State Department and said, with regard to Exhibit 948, we noticed that a one-page message from the CIA containing secret information is supposed to be attached to this file and it's missing. Would you please furnish us with a copy of this missing secret document? The answer given to the Warren Commission was that the secret message about Oswald from the CIA was accidentally destroyed while being thermofaced. This spontaneous combustion, incidentally, occurred the day after the president's assassination. I'm not even going to bother to dignify the foolishness which Newsweek and NBC and some of the other news agencies have tried to make you believe about my office. I've been district attorney of New Orleans for more than 5 years, and we have never had a single case reversed because of improper methods on the part of our staff. Nor do we rush to judgment on half-baked evidence. And the proof of that is the fact that in more than 5 years, not one defendant has walked out of the courtroom in a murder case with an acquittal. Nor have we lost a major case in 5 years. Then what is their game?
Good afternoon. The committee aimed to tie the riot to former President Trump. The panel played new audio and videotape of those close to the president. That included former Attorney General Bill Barr, who said there was no fraud in the election. Wyoming Republican Liz Cheney invoked a painting in the Capitol, which shows President George Washington resigning his military commission. Cheney says former President Trump did all he could to stay in office.
With this noble act, Washington set the indispensable example of the peaceful transfer of power, what President Reagan called nothing less than a miracle. The sacred obligation to defend this peaceful transfer of power has been honored by every American president.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi rejected the picks of House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy to serve on the committee, so there are 2 GOP members on the panel okayed by Pelosi. Republicans assert the panel lacks legitimacy.
This is their desperate attempt to try and revive something that has been investigated by the Senate. They didn't have anybody coming in to challenge why the Speaker didn't take appropriate security measures.
The panel wants to show the public that the former president tried to delay certification of the election with the riot. Now 3 hearings next week, but Washington Democrat Pramila Jayapal doubts the committee will sway the GOP.
Republicans are hitting back, tearing into the highly publicized hearings as a circus meant to divert attention away from the Biden administration's numerous problems.
all they're doing is trying to paint a new political narrative that voters need to think about in November, because the Democrat agenda has failed.
I think the country sees it for what it is. It's a partisan political committee that the American people are focused on a whole lot of other issues.
Last night's hearing was a primetime dud. Nothing came out of it that we didn't know before, and it didn't change anybody's minds. They want to throw Donald Trump in jail if they can't get that done. They want to prevent his name from appearing on the ballot. It's not about investigating January 6th.
All right, well, I'll start with you. What about the claim that he just made that nothing new was brought out last night, that they said that there would be new evidence, there would be new, information? What new did we learn last night?
Nothing, because it's not an honest pursuit of the truth. I think everyone who is being honest can look at January 6th and say that was a shameful day, in part as a riot ensued at the Capitol. I don't want to steal any talking points. We have conversations offset, and I was having a nice conversation with Sean a little bit earlier about the true nature of this show trial and whether or not it's an honest pursuit of the truth. I want to leave it to Sean, who served in Congress, about exactly how this is set up to be a reality show. But I will say this, if this were an honest pursuit of the truth and you were looking to say what is a threat today to our country, you would talk about the attempted assassination attempt of a Supreme Court justice. You would talk about another target by a group called Ruth Sent Us towards another Supreme Court justice. But the fact that we're focusing on something 17 months ago requires us to ask the question, is this an honest pursuit of the truth?
The FBI knew ahead of time that there was going to be a very large protest. They knew ahead of time, but they did nothing in terms of heightened security. They claimed that it was an intelligence failure. And on August 21st, curiously, the FBI, there was a report that, quote, there was scant evidence that the Capitol attack was organized to overturn the election as opposed to just being a protest. So there would have been no problem had there been heightened security.
The insurrection on January 6th, one of the darkest chapters in our nation's history. A brutal assault on our democracy, brutal attack on law enforcement, some losing their lives. And we heard about it last night. We can unite and defend this nation, Democrat and Republican. Allow no one to place a dagger at the throat of our democracy. That's what those hearings are all about. I didn't get to watch them last night because I was doing other business. But I tell you what, there's a lot going on.
Yep. And so here you have Nancy Pelosi, who says, I'm going to edit this production and present it to the American people. And by the way, the theory of my case, the theory of January 6th, is so weak that I can't allow Jim Jordan and Jim Banks, Republicans, to sit on the committee and actually look for evidence. We can't get the videotape from the Congress. We don't know what involvement law enforcement had. We're not even going to talk about that Donald Trump actually authorized the National Guard to come and protect the very place that he wanted to have an insurrection, allegedly. And so we all know this as lawyers, that we have trials in courtrooms where both sides present evidence. This is a show trial, and we don't have show trials in America where you try to convict people in the court of public opinion. But if we're going to talk about overthrowing an election, why are we talking about Russia collusion, where you had the greatest power centers, the Democrat Party, law enforcement, and the media working together to overthrow Donald Trump? 4 years, wall-to-wall coverage. You had 2 impeachments where they tried to undo the 2016 election. And we're talking about a couple guys from around, not a couple, thousands of people around the country coming into the Capitol. This was child's play compared to the orchestration of Russia collusion. And why aren't we having that hearing?
I just want to ask you one question, and that is that the chair, Benny Thompson, says that the job of the January 6th committee is to make sure they put together the evidence and make recommendations to Congress. It's not their job to prosecute. But I thought he was more than disingenuous when he says, I hope the Attorney General's listening. And I hope the Attorney General, if he wants evidence, will be happy to give it to him, especially since a judge says Donald Trump probably committed a crime. And that judge was an Obama-appointed judge who didn't hear all the evidence, who was only there to monitor discovery. It sounds kind of one-sided, but
because whether you're talking about the mainstream media or you're talking about Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, or Congress, frankly, they don't care about the real threats that we face domestically. to our freedoms and our democracy. So instead, they're focusing on this. They don't want to deal with the real issues that Americans are struggling with every day across the country: increasing inflation, rising gas prices, increasing crime, open borders. The list goes on and on about the very real domestic issues that we face. And frankly, they've abdicated on their most important responsibility in Congress, the one that Constitution says only Congress has, which is the power to declare war or not. So, you know, you've talked about this, Tucker. We just saw how Congress rushed through this additional funding bill of $40 billion towards this war in Ukraine. We are not only in a Cold War with Russia, we are in a hot war with Russia, with Ukraine as the proxy. And there was no serious debate whatsoever about really what the consequences of this bill would be, and frankly, whether or not we should even be in a war with Russia or frankly any other country. So this goes back to what are their priorities? Every member of Congress takes an oath of office and swears to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Well, the Constitution provides all of us with very specific rights and freedoms enshrined in that Constitution. Right now, we've got the Biden administration, we've got the Department of Justice, the mainstream media, big tech, all colluding to undermine our rights and civil liberties and freedoms. I don't see Congress taking action to address and deal with that threat. So if they really wanted to uphold their oath that they swore, that's exactly what they should be focused on right now. This is not America, and this is what's so crazy and what's angering and sad. All of these things at the same time is this is not the vision that our founders had for America. And these people who serve in the people's house, members of Congress literally go to work every day in the people's house. And it just seems like so many of them have forgotten that that's who they work for, that it's such a privilege to have that responsibility. I'm grateful to have had it and to see them going every day and abusing that privilege, abusing that responsibility, and not at all focused on what's in the best interest of the people. It should be concerning for every American across the country.
You have that exactly right. And what you and I have now both said, and which is absolute fact, is that the mission of that partisan witch hunt kangaroo committee, which is unduly authorized and not properly constituted and has no subpoena power, they have only one mission: to concoct a fake hoax around January 6th based on criminal charges against Trump to prevent him from running for re-election and taking back the White House in 2025 January. That's all this is about.
The January 6th committee has just hired a former producer of Good Morning America called James Goldston. He'll be overseeing the committee's primetime hearings on Thursday night. So the show trial now has a production crew. And of course, we'll be covering that in great detail on Thursday. By arresting Peter Navarro, they're hoping to shut up one of the most vocal critics before it begins. But Peter Navarro is a brave man. He's not shutting up. He joins us now for his first interview since being arrested. He is, as we told you, a former senior White House advisor. How was this allowed? This is so outside the bounds, unless I'm missing something, and I hope if so, you'll correct it. This is so outside the bounds of how a civilized country behaves. Did you see it coming? If not, how do you think this was allowed to happen?
Certainly, I saw it coming. We have entered really dangerous, unprecedented waters. Tucker, I was in a position where a partisan committee has weaponized the investigatory powers for the purpose of preventing Donald Trump from ever getting back in the White House. They subpoenaed me illegally, and I was faced with the untenable choice of upholding executive privilege, which was not my privilege to waive. That's Donald Trump's privilege to waive. So I did my duty to the president. I did my duty to this country. And here we sit. And the civil suit I filed, Tucker, I hope will be historically important, because there's really two constitutional issues here at stake. The first, with this weaponization of Congress's investigatory powers, is a clear violation of the separation of powers in our Constitution. The legislative branch is not supposed to be the judge, jury, and execution. I heard one of your commentators there when you played that clip. The purpose was to punish Peter Navarro. That's not their role. That's the judiciary's role. So that alone is sufficient to render what they have done illegal, and therefore what the Department of Justice did illegal. But the bigger issue here, Tucker, and this is where the Department of Justice and committee were so disingenuous. I assert the executive privilege prevents me from complying with their subpoenas. And instead of going to talk and negotiate the privilege with Donald Trump, as the law requires, they went into this fanciful and absurd notion that Biden, a sitting incumbent president, could strip his immediate predecessor of executive privilege, and me, a staff member to the president, of what the Justice Department itself, as you pointed out, has absolute testimonial immunity. It's absurd on its face.
Wait,
and every step along the line, go ahead.
Well, I have no doubt that it's unconstitutional and it's clearly an abuse of power, but I just want to get to the center of it, which is January 6th. This is the January 6th committee. You saw Liz Cheney in that disgusting, ridiculous, fawning interview say that it's also true.
Jim Banks joins me now. As we mentioned, Speaker Pelosi vetoed his nomination to the January 6th committee last year. Congressman Banks, good to have you with us today.
Good to be with you.
Thank you very much for being here. So, you think back to the Watergate hearings. I think it's probably the most similar example because it was on all day long, and then they reprogrammed some of it at night to make sure that everybody could see it. And yet you had both sides choose the members that sat on that committee. I think there were 3 Republicans and 4 Democrats on that committee. So why were you vetoed? And how did they get away with doing something where they chose all the people who were up there?
It's never happened before. 232 years of congressional history. We've never had a committee like this one that is entirely and completely partisan. And that's why the American people have already dismissed it. It's all theater, it's a circus, it's a political witch hunt, and they know it because only one side is represented. That's not the way that our process, the institution of the Congress is supposed to work. It's shameful.
So what do you think are the lessons learned from January 6th? Because that's a significant question here. What did we learn? What can we do to make sure it never happens again?
Well, first and foremost, the Capitol was not secure that day. There was a systemic breakdown of security and leadership within Capitol security, the top levels of the Capitol Police.
Horrible, horrible, horrible day for our democracy. There's no question about that. Strength of our democracy is how we would deal with it. But as I close, I just go back to where we were last weekend. Many of us gathered in New York for the 9/11. Now that was an assault from outside. What happened on January 6th, an assault from within. Horrible in both cases. It was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. No one could have ever expected that or been prepared for something like that. But it had its roots in some kinds of white supremacy, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. That's how the FBI director describes some of what is out there when he has said the U.S. is more at risk from domestic terrorism than from global terrorism. Imagine that. And let me just say in that regard, that president, he did not create those problems I mentioned, but he galvanized them. And this is what you have to be aware of every place. He galvanized them, and the social media enabled that to happen. 2 million QAnon finding like-minded thinking people. So we have to look at how social media, a blessing, but a double-edged sword.
Dates echo throughout history. December 7th, 1941. September 11th, 2001. And January 6th, 2021.
So at the Capitol today, as we told you, Kamala Harris will literally read anything that arises on the teleprompter in front of her, read a script that compared January 6th to Pearl Harbor and 9/11. And we're quoting dates that occupy not only a place on our calendars, but a place in our collective memory. December 7th, 1941, September 11th, 2001, and January 6th, 2020. So, it's easy to mock that. It's obviously ludicrous, but it's also maybe if you fought this country's wars, more than ludicrous. Maybe it's offensive. Joe Kent has fought this country's wars for many years as a career soldier. He's now running for Congress in Washington State. We wish him well in that. He joins us now. Joe Kent, thanks so much for coming on. So what was your reaction when you heard the Vice President of the United States say this?
Well, obviously, Tucker, I was deeply offended because it's absolutely appalling and just completely ridiculous. But what I want people to realize is exactly what she's doing. Like you said, I fought these wars before, and I've seen this playbook ran before. What Kamala Harris is doing, what Joe Biden is doing, is they're taking very powerful imagery, and they're saying that the attack on Pearl Harbor, the attack on 9/11, this is the same thing that took place on January 6th, because that allows people to compare Trump supporters to Nazis, to actual members of al-Qaeda. And with that imagery comes the justification to turn the tools of the state against them.
I can't believe you're running for Congress. That is such a smart and obvious analysis, and I wish I had said it before you said it, but I think that's exactly right. These words are not chosen by accident, correct?
That's right. No, these are very deliberate. Like I said, we've seen this playbook before. There are echoes to the lead up to the Iraq War that they have some intelligence. There's something they can't tell us, but we have to trust them. It's very, very dangerous. But therefore, we have to give them the authorities to send us into a war, a new war. But that war is here, and that war is against the deplorables, Trump supporters, whatever you want to call it. And that war has allowed them to deprive our citizens of their constitutional rights. Those that are still sitting in a gulag in Washington, D.C., deprived of their rights, and then even other Americans who dissent from the current regime's narrative. Just look no further than what they did to the parents that had the audacities to show up to school board meetings. They had the FBI counterterrorism centers turned against them.
No wonder Liz Cheney is for this.
So
Exactly.
interesting. Dick Cheney showed up magically again today, making a great reappearance. So there's no coincidence there.
At 1 minute before 1 o'clock this morning, the switchboard at the Capitol received a phone call. A man's voice said a bomb would go off in the building in half an hour. At 1:30 in the morning, it did, in a small, unmarked restroom on the ground floor of the Senate side, next to a barber shop and near several small offices, including one committee hearing room. For a report on the first serious damage to the nation's foremost structure since the British burned it in 1814, here is ABC congressional correspondent Bob Clark.
There was alarm for a time that other bombs might still be hidden inside the Capitol. Police used dogs specially trained to sniff out explosives in a painstaking search both inside and outside the building. The single bomb set off by a timing device left the men's room a shambles, plumbing demolished, bricks and plaster ripped from walls. Army and FBI experts sifted the debris, seeking a clue to the nature of the explosive. There was heavy damage to the nearby barber shop. Windows were smashed there, and 100 feet away in the Senate restaurant, where tables were overturned and a priceless stained glass mosaic destroyed. Damage estimated in the hundreds of thousands of dollars might have been far worse, but for the 3-foot-thick walls in the oldest part of the Capitol. As it was, the violent explosion ripped off doors in nearby conference rooms. There was no damage to the Senate chamber itself on the floor above. Daylight revealed more smashed windows and debris. Tourists were barred from the Senate wing all day, but the entire Capitol will be reopened to the public as soon as possible. Everyone entering the Senate wing today had to pass a security check. The Capitol's police chief told how an operator received the bomb threat.
This building will blow up in 30 minutes. Evacuate the building. This is in protest of the Nixon involvement in Laos.
When George Washington, the chief of a new and shaky union, laid the cornerstone of the Capitol building, he said, "It may be relied upon, it is the progress of this building that will inspire or depress the public confidence." When Lincoln first met Confederate negotiators towards the end of the Civil War, the first thing the Southerners, all former congressmen, asked was, "Tell me, sir, how is the Capitol?" Well, after yesterday's desecration, the old place is today a little depressed, and confidence is not unshaken. ABC Capitol Hill correspondent Bob Clark reports.
Officials in charge of security at the Capitol, along with Army bomb experts, were summoned to a Senate hearing. The immediate problem is to guard against any more bombings while keeping the Capitol open to the public. It was clear from the testimony about yesterday's bombing that this won't be easy.
It probably was, or could have very well been, a clock delay device. And it very likely could have been normal dynamite, which is very easy to obtain. It could have been, 15 to 20 pounds of dynamite. That amount of dynamite is very easy to bring in a briefcase.
Police did their best to keep the Capitol under tight security today, with checkpoints set up to examine packages and briefcases. We tried out the security system, carrying a briefcase into a House office building, past police guards, through an underground tunnel and into the Capitol without being stopped or searched. While we may have been recognized by some guards, it's clearly almost impossible to enforce security through all 6 buildings linked by tunnels to the Capitol. Bob Clark, ABC News, Washington.
There were telephone bomb threats to 22 other Washington buildings yesterday and 2 more today, all false alarms. Credit for the Capitol bombing was claimed in a letter received by the Associated Press today, signed by the Weather Underground and postmarked Elizabeth, New Jersey. Nevertheless, Attorney General Mitchell said today there is no evidence of a conspiracy, just a lot of people getting in on an act.
Ho Chi Minh's birthday was also marked in Washington. A bomb exploded early this morning in the Pentagon, and left-wing terrorists telephoned newspapers to say they were responsible. Stephen Gear reports.
The explosion destroyed one of the Pentagon's 140 women's restrooms and blasted out a wall on the 4th floor. No one was injured. The explosion came at 1 a.m., just moments after the Pentagon's duty officer received a warning based on one of a number of calls to newspapers, one of which said the Pentagon would be bombed in celebration of Ho Chi Minh's birthday. Rumors of other bombs plagued officials during the day, but sweeps of the building turned up nothing. Speaking for the Pentagon was an Air Force officer called to duty early this morning.
No one was hurt, fortunately, but I'd like to point out that only through good fortune that the people who work in the Pentagon at night were not seriously hurt or killed. There are quite a few people working right down the hall from where the explosion took place who could have very easily have been in that area at the time. They had no warning at all and could have been seriously hurt or killed by this irresponsible act.
Water from pipes ruptured in the blast seeped down to floors below the restroom, interrupting operation of an Air Force computer bank for several hours, soaking office furniture and equipment, and shutting down some stores operated as concessions in the concourse. So far, there's no monetary estimate of the damage. Much of the Pentagon is a public area with visitors and tourists roaming through the halls, but security was tighter today than yesterday. Ironically, before the explosion this morning, the order had gone out here at the Pentagon to tighten security measures. Because of anti-war demonstrations scheduled for this weekend in Washington and plans to block access to the Pentagon on Monday, packages were to be inspected beginning at 7 o'clock this morning. That's 6 hours after the explosion. Stephen Gear, ABC News, at the Pentagon.
People calling themselves members of the Weather Underground last night planted bombs in federal office buildings in Washington and Oakland, California. The group, apparently an offshoot of the old radical weathermen of the 1960s, claimed the bombs were set to protest American support for South Vietnam and Cambodia. We have reports, first from ABC's Ted Koppel at the State Department.
There are very few positive things to say about planting an explosive in a government building, but as an attention-getting device, it's hard to argue with the effectiveness of that bomb that went off in a third-floor washroom here at the State Department early this morning. About 20 offices, all of them empty at the time, were damaged, a few of them by the explosion itself, most of them by water leaking out of ruptured pipes. State Department spokesman Robert Anderson read a prepared statement in behalf of Secretary Kissinger.
All of us, including Secretary Kissinger, are relieved that no one was killed or injured by this totally senseless act.
At midday, the Associated Press got a phone call from a man saying he was with the Weather Underground and that bombs would explode at the Departments of Interior and Agriculture and the Smithsonian before the day was out. Some 4,500 workers at the Interior Department were eating lunch when they were told to evacuate immediately. Most went home for the day, others stayed to watch. Police used dogs specially trained to sniff out bombs in their search of the Interior Department building, but no bomb was found. At the Smithsonian, security was increased, people were watched, but there was no evacuation. Again, tightened security, but no evacuation at the Department of Agriculture. During a search, someone found a suspicious package, but it turned out to be some old bottles of wine. David Garcia, ABC News, Washington.
That other bomb threat was a dramatic one at a military induction center in Oakland, California today. We get details from newsman David Louie of station KGO-TV in San Francisco.
Police cordoned off 6 blocks around the downtown Oakland induction center after the news media received telephone bomb threats. When no bomb went off after an all-night vigil, a dog trained to detect explosives led a search party into the building. The dog failed to find the bomb, but a federal agent did in the Navy's 7th floor offices. A Navy demolition crew rushed in. The device was found above a panel in the false ceiling inside a black suitcase. With daylight came scores of spectators held behind police lines. As tense minutes turned into hours, the black suitcase bomb was pulled from the side door at the end of a rope. The demolition team, black-suited and shielded, approached the bomb with a lead pellet blanket and detonating devices. After 2 attempts, the case caught fire, in turn setting off the charge. With the bomb still ticking, officials said they had no choice but to blow it up in the street.
In view of the fact that it was ticking and that it was apparently that volatile, any more jarring might have done it, and so we figured there wasn't that much that would have done that damage in the center of the street like that. But you can imagine in a contained room, if it were contained, that large an explosive device would have probably blown at least the corner of that building and probably most of that floor out.